Hello, I'm Robert Llewellyn and welcome to a special podcast takeover episode from my good friend Quentin Wilson. Now, as some of you may know, Quentin and I have launched the Stop Burning Stuff initiative to address the growing issue of misinformation on EVs and clean energy. To support the campaign's mission, we're bringing you a Stop Burning Stuff podcast series dedicated to fact-sharing and myth-busting. Now, we hope you enjoy it, and don't forget, if you'd like to join us and help fight the FUD, all the links to sign up are below.
Like everything electric? Then you'll love our fun-packed Everything Electric expos around the world. Next up, we're in London and Harrogate. Remember, energy and transport professionals go free on the first day.
So welcome to another Stop Burning Stuff podcast where we deal primarily with myth-busting, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest for this week, who is an old friend and somebody I've spent a lot of time talking to over the years, and it's Lorna McAtear, who is the head of fleet for National Grid, the joint chair of the Association of Fleet Professionals. You used to work for E.ON with their fleets, Royal Mail with their fleets, and you have just, correct me if I'm wrong, Lorna, been voted number one in the Green Fleet GF100 list of 100 standout professionals shaping the decarbonisation of fleets and commercial vehicles. That's quite an accolade, isn't it?
That is, isn't it? It was a bit of a shock to the system on Friday when that one got announced. So, yeah, highest placed fleet manager ever, I think, in that list as well.
Yeah, and I mean, really, really kind of well deserved, because doing what you do, and this is what we're going to talk about, Lorna, is the conversion of how can I put this nicely? You know, hairy commercial van drivers to electric. I mean, the most difficult audience of all. But you've done it, and you've done it with good humour, good grace, and great success too. Just so
We have to, otherwise we'd cry. I'd be lying there with my hand in my head, crying.
Let's start by telling us, how easy or difficult that was across the Royal Mail fleet, the E.ON fleet, and now the National Grid fleet.
I think, as brilliant as that accolade is, one of the downsides is I think give the impression it's easy to do, and it isn't. So it's not easy. We all know that change for anyone is a real challenge, and when you've got people doing things the way they've done it for 100 odd years, then it's even harder to get them to change. And when you move into a commercial vehicle space, which, let's face it, is low margin, it's operational, it's never been seen by businesses as critical, and suddenly it is critical. And we saw that with COVID as well. Fleet managers are worth their weight in gold now, whereas before they were just dirt on the bottom of a finance director's shoes. They were an annoyance and a legal requirement that you had to have. Now, actually, they're critical to the success of any business. And we're seeing that change come through. So it's not been an easy journey, but it's been exciting, hasn't it? It's been good fun.
Yeah. And just tell us, what are the real kind of problem areas when you're trying to convert this traditional driver to something really new, strange, and unfamiliar?
It's like any change. So any new vehicle, whether it was the old ICE ones and new ones, or going over to electric now, you've got your drivers that are really, really keen and want to do it. So you always work with those. Then you've got the ones that are over my dead body. Am I ever going to take that kind of vehicle? And you actually work with them as well, because if you can get them converted, then you get everybody in the middle. So you work at the two ends of the extreme, and you kind of almost pit them against each other as well, because they'll have your battles for you. But you work with them. It's all about education. Doesn't matter how much you go through this, it is about education. And with electrics, it's about getting those bums on the seat. Once they're in it and driving it and using it, nearly all of those arguments that they had start to disappear. And don't get me wrong, it's still a huge challenge, especially with commercial vehicles. Vans have to be operationally efficient, and that's still a real challenge going forward. Hence, lots of working externally still to make sure we get that messaging through. Cars, dare I say, is easy, even though it's one of the more emotive subjects going. But in terms of the range and the capabilities of a car, it's done. We will that will continue with its new architecture, its further ranges, its better designed batteries, the efficiencies around it will just keep continuing. But once you're in one of them, as I do, and we've talked about it for a long time, once you're in, you ain't going back.
No, absolutely, and this is what all the surveys say. So you are saying to us today, Lorna, that your experiences of converting this very traditional audience to electrification has been broadly okay.
Broadly okay, yeah. The biggest challenges we've got, cars were fine, but it always helps in a company car when it's money in the back pocket of the employee. So you can't ignore that when you do your plans. I've been lucky to work for a company that's quite supportive of the change. So again, and maybe it's the way I approached it. I didn't go in with this is going to save us money. I went in with do you really want your child sitting behind an exhaust pipe spewing out dirt kind of attitude? No, we don't. So this is what we're going to do to change it. Here's our target. It's going to take me 10 years and I'll do as much as I can in that time. And you're going to help support me, aren't you? Kind of thing. And it was like, yes, that makes sense. And that's what we did. So it's flipping it on its head. So it was more of what's the cost of not doing it as opposed to how much is it going to cost us to do it. Don't get me wrong again. We took advantage of every single grant that we could, but we couldn't use them all. So we had to work out what we could, what we couldn't do, how we went through it. I still had to put business cases together. I still had to do the financing. I still had to have lots of stakeholder management groups and conversations with people. But bit by bit, you just work through it because the answer was it's happening. This is inevitable. So how quickly can we do it?
Okay, well, look, let's move on to your kind of practical experiences of running electric fleets. There are, as you and I know, Lorna, and it has to be said for transparency that Lorna and I know each other quite well, and we've had lots and lots of chats about electrification, and we're always sort of meeting up, and it's a very good relationship. I'm very pleased to be able to say, and whenever I've been asked a question about National Grid, you are my go-to person. to give you those difficult questions. But the myths that surround things like battery degradation, tyre wear, the fact that it's difficult to charge these things, and this is just a fad, and we'll all go back to ice one day. Your experiences at the coalface, Lorna, does that sound like reality to you, or are your experiences different to those myths that we're hearing?
Oh, my experiences are very different to the myths. So, as we said, let's declare this. That I'm in my car. I've done over 40,000 miles and I'm still on the original set of tyres. Legally still on my original set of tyres.
We both are. And it's just very sad or very slow drivers, Lord. But maybe we'll get an award for that.
But I mean, it's great. And when I talk with, I've got over 1,400, 1,500 company car drivers now in electric. A lot of them are in their second electric vehicle as well. And what I've got now coming from those drivers is they want the more mod cons, whereas before they'd take anything so they could get that BIK saving in their back pocket. Now they've become really particular again and they're really hard work again because they're I want. But even when we talk to all of those, there are one or two that drive them like go-karts, or they had a particular vehicle that didn't get the tyres to work right, and they did get through their tyres. But most of them, we're just not seeing that tyre side of it, and we're not seeing the battery degradation either that everybody's talking about. Yes, batteries will diminish over time. Every single battery does. There's no denying the chemistry behind that. And crikey, I've had to learn chemistry, physics, biology, all sorts of stuff in this role now that I'm in. But when you go through it all, the fear that is out there is just so unfounded. And yes, you might get a queue at the charger, but Quentin, there I was up in Scotland again last week in my electric, pootling around. Frustratingly, the hotel I stay at, and I have stayed at for the last 15 odd years, as I left on the day I was leaving, spotted the charger around the back that's brand new that's gone in and I didn't realise was there. So, it's evolving all the time. And I just went to my favourite haunts and then just like, oh, I never spotted that one. Damn it. I'm usually really good at spotting them. But one of the charging places, again, my favourite horn, I went, it was like, oh my gosh, it's full. This is the fullest I've ever seen it. But a car pulled out and I pulled in, so it wasn't a problem. And then another one I went to, it was empty. It's down to timing, it's down to location, it's time to pick in where you are. And it's constantly evolving. It's that chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, look, we've all queued at petrol stations, and in my 100,000, 150,000 miles of driving electric cars, I have never queued for longer than maybe 5 minutes at a
Yeah.
charging station. So, look, just to be clear, then, as a fleet operator, with how many vehicles under your wing,
So
roughly?
we've got about 10,000 vehicles in the UK.
And how many of those are electric?
So out of the 2,000 cars that we've got 1,500 pure electric now.
Okay, so those 1,500 pure electrics, you are not, and I just won't be able to clear about this, you're not seeing a higher wear of tyres on electric versus ICE.
No, especially not on the commercial vehicles. So when everybody
Right.
talks about this being weight related or anything else, and of course the commercial vehicles, it's the same weight, whatever you're doing with it. So no, we just aren't seeing it. Now, there are one or two makes. I can't do this categorically black, white. There are some grey areas. And we have seen one or two vehicle makes that do seem to get through their tyres slightly quicker. And we're still assessing, because this is early data, we're still assessing, is that driver and the type of car they've ordered, or is it the manufacturer putting the wrong tyres on for the type of vehicle it now is? But when you look at the data over a really long period of time, actually, as we start to see people like me go in for the first time with the tyres are lasting. One or two
I mean,
differences.
it's a conversation with Quick Fit, and they say that actually the difference is not huge at all. And you do get this peak with early ownership where they're ragging it, particularly with Teslas, and they get through the rears reasonably quickly. But in broad terms, they are not wearing as fast as people are saying. So let's go on and just double check on the statement about the batteries. You're not seeing battery degradation. You're not seeing battery failures. Have you had any battery failures?
Not that I recall. If there was, it would have been a really, really early vehicle, brand new, warranty type fault, as opposed to batteries failing. My car, we're into my 4th year of my car now. I've dropped 0.01% of a battery. When you take it to 100% and you're like, oh, there we go.
No, not 1%. My goodness.
Yeah, give or take, I reckon. Yeah, it just doesn't quite give me what it used to say.
So that's good. And fires? How many fires have you had?
0.
Because there's supposed to catch fire, Laura.
But they cause car parks to blow up, don't they? They cause ships to collapse. It's just awful, Quentin. No, but on a serious note, we've taken, one of the things we've looked at is, are we still... It's a risk assessment, isn't it? So are these any more dangerous? No. Do they catch fire any more than a nice vehicle? Definitely not. But when they do, you'll have loads of people quoting thermal runways and everything else. So as long as you've taken the appropriate risk management when you put your charges in, when you do everything else with your vehicle, then we're absolutely fine.
Yeah. And I think you as a large fleet operator, to be able to say these things unequivocally, it's really, really strong, because as well as I do, there's so much stuff out there on the internet and in the press. I mean, it is just an epidemic, and I think it's and other people say, particularly the OEMs, that this is affecting sales of new and indeed used EVs, because people are reading all this stuff on Facebook and in certain newspapers, both tabloid and broadsheet, and believing every single word of it. So it's really important that you, at the coalface, chipping away at this, running these cars and vans on a daily basis, confirm the facts, that they aren't the liabilities and failing and catching fire and the tyres wearing out, as we've been led to believe. Tell me about cold weather. Any observations during cold weather?
Yeah, we do struggle with cold weather, especially on the commercial vehicles. So, there's a few announcements gone out lately. We're starting to observe early stuff on commercial vehicles. So the one thing I'm keen about, this isn't a black or white, EVs are better or ICE are evil kind of thing. This is a dose of reality. As a fleet manager, I'm practical. So I'll only change vehicles when I need to change vehicles. I will only put new technology in when I need the new technology. And if there is a challenge at the moment, I'll highlight what a challenge is. So the challenges we've got on commercial vehicles right now is the 12-volt battery. So the difference is the tech on those commercial vehicles. So when you charge a car, and you'll know it, good old alternator days. You know, you drive around, your alternator recharges your battery. Well, in an electric vehicle, especially in the winter, you're not getting as much put into that 12-volt battery pack. And the 12-volt battery is doing even more work because it is doing your heating in your cab, it's starting that motor in the first place. I was going to say engine. I really need to change my new lexicon. Going through all of that as well. And what we find is some of the vehicles, and we're talking to the manufacturers as to whether they can change it. It appears you put your commercial vehicle on charge, and as you and I know, you don't always go to 100% because that's not the optimum thing to do in a vehicle. Unfortunately, though, a 12-volt battery in some manufacturers only starts charging once your main battery is at 100%, and then it switches and charges the 12-volt. So that's something technical that a lot of people haven't registered at. Now, not all manufacturers do that. Some manufacturers, it does charge in parallel, so you can get both working at the same time. So we've got a little bit of a challenge at the moment in how do we make sure that 12-volt stays topped up all the time. So we're talking with manufacturers, and hopefully it's just a software change that to that piece, please. But it's these things that we're finding out. So that's one of the early adopter things I guess I do is we'll uncover these things, we'll go back to the manufacturers, we'll say we think it's this, they'll go no it's not, it's your telemetry, and we'll go no we think it's this, and then you just keep working through with them until you can get to what a real sensible genuine answer is. So that's what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, so that's interesting that it's the lead acid battery, not the lithium.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's just the technology and the drain on it because you use it so much more now on these vehicles. So when it comes to the winter side of it, yes, we lose some of our range. Yes, we lose because of the weights and everything else. But actually, the biggest problem is the 12 volt.
How much range do you think you lose, Laura? Because I mean, yeah, go on.
On a commercial vehicle, yeah, it can be up to 50%.
Wow. Gosh,
now,
why is that?
But that's why we've put out a press release from the Association of Fleet Professionals, and we've got all the fleet managers together. We really want the WLTP to be adjusted. So for anyone that's not understanding what that is, that's the worldwide light testing protocol for vehicles. And it's a standard one, but they base it on a 70 kilogram person. You know, okay, I've now lost some weight, but that used to be me, and I'm not exactly big. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that manufacturers did to make sure they can maximize the range in that vehicle. And we're going, please be realistic. Please put a full load in, not half a load or 3/4 or 1/4, whatever it is. Put a full load in, drive it in the winter as well as in the summer, and give us more realistic. One or two manufacturers do. They do have a little chart that goes across it, but an awful lot of them don't. So we're just trying to call for better upfront range to help people make more constructive decisions, especially on the commercials. Cars, fine.
That's really interesting because the WLTP, for anybody who's not familiar with it, is a government, well, a Europe-wide standard that says what range you're going to get. And it's woefully inaccurate and causes problems when people buy an Audi e-tron and expect to get 300 miles and they get 200 miles. And it will cause problems. And I think, you know, RWR, real world range, is something that we should have. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. And it's the same on cars, isn't it? You and I know that some of that battery is actually put to one side. So, yeah, there's WLTP, and then they do a tiny bit that they take off it again. So whenever you get your brand new vehicle, it will never, ever do what the WLTP says.
With passenger cars, it's about 25 to 30% less than a WLTP figure. And we kind of live with that. But that 50% is quite worrying. So
it's huge on a commercial vehicle because of the weights that you add into it and everything else that you do with those vehicles, the amount of power takeoff equipment that you have. You know, utility companies, we really design those vehicles out. So final mile vehicles, not so bad, but they'll still notice the difference. But anyone that uses it as a toolbox really does need much better WLTP standards.
And what kind of temperature drops would that 50% loss be apparent in? Is it really extreme? Is it?
Yeah, it tends to be the more extreme because, of course, the battery can do its work and warm up and everything else in the milder temperatures. So it is when you get to the low single, 4 degrees and below kind of range. But conversely, you get the same in the summer, don't you, with all the air conditioning?
Well, yes, true, true. And I mean, as you keep saying, we're at the infancy of all this, and we just need to understand that the internal combustion engines had 120 years to evolve and refine
Absolutely.
and become the state of the art thing that it is at the moment. And we are only, what, 10 years into this. So it is all very nascent and untried.
10 years in with a social media presence that tells us we're all wrong.
I know, completely. You know, there are, what, 1 million EVs in UK roads now,
Mm,
and globally, is it about 30 million? You know,
yeah.
it's huge. And what I always say to people is that, okay, you hear these siren voices on the internet and on Facebook and social media and in the papers telling us that we shouldn't buy electric cars or vans. And these people have never driven electric cars or vans, or usually it is not the case. But we never hear from those million people out there who are driving electric cars, and we see them strobing up and down the motorways at considerable speed. It's like, it's so counterintuitive. They're not on fire on the hard shoulder. They're not running out of range on the hard shoulder. They're not kind of surrendering their cars en masse. They're just happily getting on with life with an EV. And we need to hear more of their voices, I think.
We do, but it doesn't sell newspapers though, does it, Quentin?
No.
You and I know they're even putting up clickbait articles now that have the headline, and then when you read the article is the opposite of what the headline says. But nobody's going to
Yeah,
click it.
I know. I mean, anybody listening to this, these are wise words from Lorna. I mean, it's absolutely true, right? Wake up in the morning and look at the phone, and you just see sort of 4 or 5 articles which have these apocalyptic headlines, and you look down, and it's not as bad as it appears. And it is in an era of reduced advertising spend that editors have to get this clickbait to get the clicks
Yep.
through the site, to be able to have the figures to say, look, we're doing the business and spend some more money with us. And it's so sad. But what it's doing is it's completely skewing the debate. It's polarizing the country. We've got a left who likes electric cars, and then we've got a right who hates them. And then those two groups are at loggerheads. The smug people in the Teslas with the polo necks and the wrap round sunglasses versus
I'm glad you're saying all that and not me.
their diesel pickup trucks, out of my cold dead hand. And you watch it, because you and I have been at this for quite a while now, and it is amazing to see. Because there was a time, wasn't there, where people would smile indulgently at you because you had an electric car and say, "Oh, how interesting! Well, you're saving the planet. Good for you." Now, my goodness.
And I think it's a shame, isn't it? Because you and I have talked as well that we've now got this divisive side. You're either
Yeah.
for or you're against. And actually, it's that old cliche, the old Pareto, whichever way you want to look at it. The majority of us are in that practical, when it works, we'll do it. So I think the challenge is, how do you fight against all those deliberate myths, not just accidental ones, the deliberate myths, without ending up on the opposite extreme? How do you do it with the dose of reality? Because the one that EVs are expensive, well, yeah, they are expensive, but actually you then weigh out all the other bits and pieces, and they're not for everybody yet. But only 26% of people ever buy brand new. So when everybody goes out and about, we need them to be affordable. It's like, well, keep letting the fleets get them, keep letting the people get those that can afford it, let them buy them, because it will trickle into the market that you normally buy your vehicles from anyway. So that's the bit that I think infuriates me, is how do you get all this through? It's a bit like the headline the other day, wasn't it? EV sales plummet. Nobody's
Yeah.
buying secondhand. And then you read the rest of the article and secondhand sales have shot up. And it's like,
The
really?
highest fuel type on Auto Trader, selling the fastest. It's absolutely crazy, and they are too expensive, and now they're too cheap. We can't win. Electric car prices are falling, and people say, no, they depreciate too much. This is no good. So where do we go? But look, that takes us to an interesting question, I think, which is the total cost of ownership. That's, I think, a figure that isn't talked about with electric cars. The upfront price is obviously more, although it's coming down. Petrol, diesel, and EV second-hand have almost reached
They're
price parity.
normalizing. They're
Yeah,
normalizing.
absolutely. But I mean, I saw a Model 3 Tesla the other day with 60,000 miles on it for 16 grand. That sounds like a bargain to me. But in your experience, compare ICE to EV ownership costs. That's lack of servicing. All the usual sort of cam belts, chains, filters, etc. How much cheaper is it to run an EV than an ICE?
So I've got a challenge answer in that question, because obviously I lease mine over a short period of time and then I feed them into the second-hand market. But all of those upfront costs are actually lower. Now, dose of reality piece. We've got supply chain issues still. We still can't get parts. So when they go off the road, nobody has recovered yet from COVID. I don't care what everybody believes. We do still have supply chain challenges. So that still has a knock-on effect to when you do have a serious incident in your vehicle, that vehicle is going to be off-road for a while.
And you're talking accident.
Yep, anything like that, and it's still going to be a challenge. And when you're putting vehicles in, all of the manufacturers have got new technology here. Until it filters in and it goes across every single one of the ranges, actually their supply of part replacement isn't there. You used to be able to go non-OEM parts, didn't you, in your repair network and buy bits and pieces. We're still learning. They're still consolidating. They're still recovering from COVID. They still can't get hold of all the parts they need. And whilst we can get new vehicles now in a timely fashion, actually some of the parts replacements are still a challenge. So the reason it's not easy for me to answer that question for is, yes, the theory is it's so much cheaper. And in a lot of cases, it is. But when you do have a vehicle off-road for longer, now, not just EVs, my ICE vehicles, when they go off-road for a parts repair, are taking just as long, if not longer, than some of my electric vehicles. And that's a trend we need to watch closely, because actually some of the ICE vehicles haven't got the replacement parts anymore because the manufacturers have moved away from that model and they're moving into their EV-only models.
Yeah. So you've got this hiatus in between, haven't you?
We
this
have.
transition.
Yeah. So it's going to be messy for a while. That's the reality of it. We're going to have to weather this storm out a little bit longer, but it's normalizing.
But for those listening who aren't familiar with the technology, there are no spark plugs, no real hoses, no cam belts, no timing chains, no DPF.
I took my car in for its first MOT. It was in and out in like a matter of whatever it was. Take it in for a service. You can sit and watch it because literally it's just back again because there's very little to be done.
And that's worth remembering, that over a period of time, say 4 or 5 years, you are, if you're driving an electric passenger car, going to be able to save a significant amount of money over an ICE car, because when they do get older, they start to really, really cost more. And those MOTs become more and more of a challenge as all the anti-emission stuff starts to fail.
And it's another one of those myths, isn't it, that we're going to debunk here when everybody says, all of the batteries get thrown away and everything else. It's like, no, they say, is it what? The myth was that only 5% ever get recycled, and we know it's closer to 95% of those boats. It's a huge amount that get recycled because they're either getting recycled, taken out and put in other vehicles, or the components are actually being stripped back and then reused again, which we know you don't get in other bits and pieces. So there's just that whole understanding of it, that because it's an embryonic market, nobody knows about it. So they don't know it's happening.
But we know about it, Lorna.
I know. This is why you and I are talking about it.
I know, but you can pick this stuff up. This is what makes me so cross, that you can understand about recycling batteries because there's loads of stuff on the internet now, and it will tell you that the black mass and the sodium and the lithium and the coal and the nickel and the manganese can all be recycled and turned into black mass, and that can be as much as. And here's a really amazing statistic. I spoke to a recycler the other day who said that could constitute, the batteries that are already here in the UK, if we manage them properly and recycle them properly, 20% of our black or our cathode active material needs by 2030, just by recycling the stuff we've got rather than selling it to China. So nobody's going to be taking batteries down to the tip anytime soon because they're too valuable, and people don't realize them. But this myth has been there forever about this steaming conical pile of radioactive batteries just down the road from your cul-de-sac, Anyway, don't get me started. Let's just move. I'll ask you to put your Mrs. National Grid hat on now. and ask you some
You
tricky
do
questions.
remember I am the fleet manager, don't you? Go on,
I
go
know.
for it.
The listeners need to know that you worked for a fantastic bloke called Graham Cooper,
I
who
never worked for him. We worked together.
we
We were like
worked
a
together.
yin and yang.
He was, the real expert at National Grid about, all this stuff, and that's kind of how we got to know each other. But you know your stuff about the grid, because I've been asking you for years. So let's go with this first overwhelming question that we always hear, Lorna. The grid can't cope.
Yes,
When
it
we all
can.
see this, the answer I always get.
Yes.
In a nanosecond, she says yes. So look, tell us in a bit more detail why it can cope if we all plug in our electric cars and we're at 80% kind of adoption rates.
So, as you know, we've probably got this quote actually written now, haven't we? I think it's on our myth-busting page. The grid itself can cope. There is enough capacity in it. So I think peak capacity was back in 2012. We hit 62 gigawatts, and we have never been anywhere near that since. So even if all the electric vehicles we had plugged in, the grid, in terms of its capacity, would cope. The reality is not everything is in the right place right now. So we all want electricity. We all want more electricity. We're clambering after it as much as we can. And what we're having to do now is put electricity into places it never used to be. And because we're doing more and more renewable side of it as well, we're having to get more connections in place to make sure we can do all that. And the other thing that people forget, again, Graham Cooper's words, our words, ones we use all the time, this is a transition, not a cliff edge. So again, the grid can cope because we are constantly building. We are not sitting there on a 1960s old infrastructure. We are building. We are constantly upgrading what we have. And this is the biggest upgrade we've ever had in decades. And we're working on it. So we've got connection requests in for about 600 gigawatts. We don't need that much. And when I say we don't need that much, we don't need that much even for heating and transport, which is why the grid can cope. Because at the moment, just talking the transport side of it, we will be able to get things in. We just got to tweak a little bit. So again, remember, the grid doesn't make, buy or sell. It just moves electricity around. So I think that's a common misnomer as well with people. We just move it. We make all the connections. We make it happen. We let it flow. So that's what our primary task is to get those connections in.
And electricity consumption has actually gone down, hasn't it? Because of the use of more efficient equipment, more efficient light bulbs, things like that. So we're not using as much electricity as we were in the 90s.
Correct. The LED light bulb invention saw the biggest decline in electricity uses that we've ever had. So the more advanced we get in all of our technology, just like we are in the electric vehicles, the better the architecture, the better use of the batteries, the way we use battery storage as well in our grid now, everything all comes in and balances that out. And as you get more technical with the EVs, of course, an EV with its bidirectional capabilities can also act as a balancing part of the grid as well. So it's every answer together to help us go through. So that's why your answer is always yes. The grid can cope.
But your point about batteries is really important. And what I see that people just don't get, they see the electric car in isolation, but the research and development to get from, and you remember those little cars that would do 50 miles to one charge, there's Mitsubishis and Peugeots, IMEVs and Ions. We're now at 350, some cars, 400 even.
Yep.
And that's battery research and technology, because billions have been poured into this. Now, what we need to do is take the recycled batteries we talked about earlier and make those into energy storage and balance the grid and sort of shore up the grid so we can accept all these renewables that come and that just generally get wasted when it's peak. So we can actually have a different power system in this country, cheaper energy for all from cleaner renewables. And those static batteries are the key to all this, aren't they?
Have you ever been to the Ajax Stadium over in Amsterdam?
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. That battery storage facility they've got, how they deal with everything out there is absolutely phenomenal. And they're all the old Nissan Leaf batteries. That's almost the worst kind of battery compared to the batteries we have coming through now as well.
Ones, that used to. do 70 miles, and that was your lot. My
Yeah,
wife was
but
always terrified. Just,
it
yeah,
powers that whole stadium, and what they're doing over there is phenomenal. So anybody wants a case study, just go and have a look at what they do and how they do that.
and this is what it's all about, isn't it? It
Hmm.
is about changing the way we use energy, moving away from fossil fuels and building up this infrastructure reinforced by these large batteries. And Musk has done it in Australia, in LA. He's reinforced the grid, and it just balances it, doesn't it? And when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, taking all that renewable electricity and storing it in those big batteries can power businesses, even towns and cities.
And it's not new. We've done it before. Do you remember all those old gas storage tanks that used to go up and
Yeah,
down when you used to drive up and down the motorways?
yeah. It's crazy,
It's
but we don't seem
just
to want the
storage.
progress. Yeah, I know. So let's talk about a change in the electricity networks. One of my bugbears right now is the fact that wholesale price of electricity, is based on the last component in the supply chain, which usually happens to be a gas-fired power station, and that hikes up the cost of electricity that consumers and businesses pay for. Why do we have this ridiculous component? Why can't we just have electricity separated from gas in the wholesale price?
So the first thing I'm going to say is, unlike Graham Cooper, I don't have a master's in an energy degree. This is a really, really complicated subject. And I'm a fleet person, and I've already had to learn about physics and chemistry and mental well-being and all sorts of other things to do with vehicles. So when it comes to this part of the grid, every time I look at it, I think, my God, this is economics. This is so complicated, because the one thing we have to remember, the market is a global market. It's not just what we do in the UK. And, Greece have tried to do something recently. Italy have tried to do something different with that decoupling. So quite simply, there's a lot of things. So you have marginal pricing, don't you? That's what you're talking about there. And
Yeah.
where that bit comes from is you have this, what they call a merit order curve. So this is all the people bidding or connecting or producing the energy. And this is a podcast, isn't it? So nobody can see my hands and what I'm doing here. But then you have your demand curve. And where those two cross, that's the point that you get your equilibrium price, your balancing price. So yes, whilst the gas comes on late, and we could all say, yes, but if we could get rid of that, we could do this. Actually, that means the renewable people are making a bit more money, which also means they can invest into even more renewables, which means they can put back into that grid and that infrastructure even quicker. So the interesting bit with this marketplace and why it's so complicated is, whilst at National Grid, we welcome any change that's going to come through. As I said, we don't make, buy or sell, we just move. So we will work with and help balance that grid no matter what the answer is. But it's so complex because it's, again, the mechanism has worked for decades. And what we're looking at now, this is probably where I'm going to argue against you, Quentin, there will be a first, won't it? Is actually, just because we've had a blip in the marketplace over the last couple of years, do you actually want to change what's worked for decades across a globe for what's a blip? The answer may be we still need to, but actually it's really, really complicated. And we just have to be careful of the unintended consequences. Because what the flexibility of that grid gives us at the moment, it allows us to minimise the purchase costs of electricity. So despite the fact it has gone up, it does overall allow us to keep that cost down. And it gives us adequate coverage. That's the other bit that we have to remember. We do only put that gas on when we've run out of everything else. So I get the challenge that we all feel that we're paying for that fossil fuel, but actually it's a really, really complex process. And anything we do to it, we have to be mindful of how we do it. So I know the government's consulted on it. I know their first set of nice 72-page documents come out, and I know there'll be more findings soon as we get the results of that. So we're all asking the questions, but I think everybody's how do we actually do this without breaking what's actually really, really robust at the moment and keeps our lights on right now?
A very practical answer from a very practical person. We can carry on talking for the rest of the day. Right? It's always fantastic. But look, we're going to run out of time in a minute. So look, let me just say, look, thank you very, very much indeed for your insights and for your support. It's really nice, when I'm ploughing this lonely furrow to see the friendly face saying, "Don't worry, the grid can cope."
But just keep saying it until everybody believes us. You'll be fine.
It will be fine. So look, head of fleet for National Grid, joint chair of Associated Fleet Professionals, and not forgetting number one of Green Fleet's CF 100, Lorna McAtear. Thank you very much indeed.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Please support our Stop Burning Stuff Patreon and help us to tackle misinformation about electric vehicles and clean energy.
Thank you as always for listening. You'll find any links that we discussed in the show notes below. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Do subscribe or share with others. And if you'd like to find out more about Stop Burning Stuff or help fund our fact-sharing mission, you can do so at Patreon. That's patreon.com /stop burning stuff. So that's patreon.com/stop burning stuff. Thanks as always, and see you next time.